Hello and welcome from me, Mike Scott. I'm in the Lake District today, Wordsworth's country in the United Kingdom. Welcome too from Mike Collins, who's in Maryland, and today's speaker, Neil Garrod, who is in South Africa. So it's a real kind of international range today. Welcome to this, the fifth event in our Zoom season, Cultural Encounters, Books That Have Made a Difference, where we're bringing together scholars and their audiences in order to explore themes of encounter in literary works and contemporary cultural debates. Today, we will be discussing A Month in the Country. Dr. Neil Garrod is our speaker, and he is a polymath, really. His principal academic background, however, is mathematics, where he took his degrees at the University of Manchester Institute of Science and Technology. And he has published in mathematical programming, accounting, and financial analysis, as well as in higher education policy. He's held university posts as a lecturer, professor, and senior administrator in New York, in Wales, in Scotland, in South Africa, and in the United Arab Emirates. He holds an honorary professorship from the University of Ljubljana in Slovakia. He is well known as an athlete, a long-distance runner, and he has a strong interest in literature, which he brings to his talk today on J.L. Carr's A Month in the Country, which was first published in 1980 by Harvester Press. It was turned into a screenplay by Simon Gray for a 1987 film with Colin Firth, Kenneth Branagh, Natasha Richardson, and Patrick Malahide. If any questions occur to you during this talk, please type them in using the Q&A button, not the chat button at the bottom of your computer screen. Towards the end, I will ask as many questions as possible, and Mike Collins will join me to do that, for our guest to answer. Please don't leave your questions to the last minute, as we may run out of time. So I'm looking forward to this very informative lecture. Over to you, Neil.
Well, thank you very much, Mike. I'm sorry I've got to correct you. Our American viewers, your president-elect's wife is from Slovenia, and that's where Ljubljana is, not Slovakia. A common mistake, but one I think we need to correct just in case the president-elect or his wife is participating in this seminar. But I'm particularly pleased to be participating in this series of presentations. As Mike described me as a polymath, I often feel myself something of an other in my own academic career. A mathematician who crab walked into accounting and finance research, followed by a period in university executive positions, who now spends his time trying to write poetry. He's hardly a well-trodden career path. Also, my birthplace and childhood home was not that of my parents, and so was always a little bit other. The real kicker was, of course, when visiting grandparents, as I sounded different and was therefore considered a bit other, not different enough to be considered foreign, but not similar enough to be thought local. My local's a very complicated amalgam of hope, expectation, and reality. Perhaps as us all, but I relate very closely with the concept of the other. The cultural encounter considered in my chosen novel, A Month in the Country by J.L. Carr, is perhaps not an obvious one, but offers, I think, an interesting perspective and nuance on the interplay between the local and the global. In Fratelli Tutti, Pope Francis has called for a culture of encounter that promotes communication and builds trust, whilst acknowledging the inevitability of conflict. He encourages us to extend out from self and family to a suffering world, to move away from black or white, them or us, foreigner or national, immigrant or fourth generation. He talks about a world on the brink and that we need to pull back from protectionism, individualism, and isolation to a more global perspective. A month in the country offers us a World War I veteran shattered by shell shock who has lost his sense of self. He's hollowed out, a husk, a man that does not know how to interact with the world. His local has been demolished. His humanity has gone. He has no local to expand from. The only thing he has left are the resources of the global to recreate himself. More a question of where to go rather than pulling back from the brink. In this story, we see the power of the global in reaffirming the local, not as a threat, but as a community in which we can find ourselves without rejecting others. Our world feels increasingly divided along national, religious, and cultural lines, where our own local seems to be defined by where we decide to draw our boundaries within the global, in all its beauty and contradiction. After all, the global is just an accumulation of locals. Like a Venn diagram where each circle represents a local and the global is the union of them all. Apologies, my mathematician's background coming out here. Our own personal local is that area in the center where we create our own interactions, intersections. For some, this is a large area. They feel comfortable with a whole range of people. For others, the area is very small and they struggle mixing even with those in their most adjacent local. Our gentle, empty soldier provides a deceptively persuasive character in which we can explore these challenges. I think a particularly strong message from the book is that the hero does not simply adopt a new local. He does not try to slot into one faction or another for which he was not born and has no experience. Rather, he lets all the values, demands, and consequences that he is presented with suffuse into his being, letting them rest and find their own balance without judgment or reflection. In this sense, he's a perfect canvas. He's drained of everything, including prior prejudice. Now he just watches. Well, actually, just sees rather than watches, and lets things settle as they will. The book highlights how tricky it is to define local. Global is much easier, it's everything. But any local is a trimmed global, and where do you stop? However local you get, even in a small bucolic village in Yorkshire, where our soldier finds himself, you can go smaller. The inhabitants of the village face their own factions and groups that to a lesser or greater extent mix, ignore, or just rub shoulders with each other. Defining the boundaries of our local is as much a decision of what to exclude as what to include. But if that is the case, why not adopt the global itself as our local? Why does our soldier need to create a new local? Why is global on its own not nourishing enough? I think this novel points to the fact that citizen of the world is something of an oxymoron. You can only be a citizen of your own locale. One can appreciate the diversity of the world and enjoy experiencing it, but it is as if our minds are not big enough to cope with being its citizen. Without context, we find it threatening and overwhelming. For that, we need a more restricted perspective, things that do not need thought, things that are taken for granted. The modern technologies of rapid intercontinental travel, the World Wide Web, and 5G have all contributed to lull us into a false sense that our local is bigger than it really is. We transport our assumptions, generalizations, and expectations beyond the boundaries in which they were formed and in which they make sense. Oh, I do beg your pardon. I seem to have a technical error here. Let me. Yes, assumptions make our lives easier, simpler. Things that don't challenge our day to day life don't need to concern us too much. They can be assumed away. Take those assumptions to someone else's space, and they often look like unthought through generalizations and smack of prejudice. But then they weren't designed to travel. If we open up to the global, those assumptions, generalizations, and expectations need to be reworked. Ill informed assumptions just don't travel, however much they stop our brains hurting at home. Pope Francis published Fratelli Tutti on the feast day of St. Francis, who himself extended his local in tiny incremental steps, venturing out from his own base further and further into new places. He opened his eyes and mind. But this was not a linear incremental process. It was not straightforward or without challenge. He rushed back many times to his own local when things became too much. He returned to his comfort zone to recharge his battery and let his new experiences digest. The global was just too much in one bite. Our soldier has no comfort zone, nor safe place to return to digest, or to recuperate. He needs to find himself a local that provides him peace. Walking in others' shoes is a very tricky, if not impossible, task. But do we need to fully understand the other to accept them? Having no local of his own, Birkin is himself non threatening. He can simply observe the different others in the village and through that observation grow comfortable with them and recreate his own local. This slow incremental growth relies on gentle, uncluttered, but not uncritical observation of the global that surrounds him. This cultural encounter of our soldier is thankfully not a common one. It is personal and very modest as far as the rest of the world is concerned, but perhaps it is the more powerful for it. Through his individual personal battles, we can better contextualize and focus on the other. Our own failures and traumas maybe offer the best backdrop to understand our issues with the global, an inward rather than an outward perspective of the other. Pope Francis portrays too many of us in this world as thinking of ourselves as self made prosperous orphans. A narcissistic view that often everything we achieve is due to our own hard work and ignores the gifts bestowed on us through diligent selection of our own parents. Our unique combination of DNA owes nothing to our own industry or character. Rather, they are its product. But that is the eternal conundrum. How much praise do we deserve for our own elbow grease, and how much should we be thankful for all our unsolicited gifts? To answer, we must separate out what is not separable. In the same way that we try to separate our local from the global and differentiate our other from their other. Our soldier has no such questions or conundrums. He's a clean slate, wiped clean by the horrors of war, cleaned in the most horrific fashion possible. But as a blank canvas, we can track how the global can feed a local if the normal barriers, assumptions, prejudices are washed away. It's not that the global becomes the local, there is still choice of the individual involved, but they're shown not to be diametrically opposed or natural enemies. Turning now specifically to the chosen novel, it was written in 1979 and published in 1980. It's based in the 1920s and follows the return of Tom Birkin from the First World War trenches with a facial twitch and stammer resulting from severe shell shock. The work was shortlisted for the Booker Prize and won the Guardian Fiction Prize, and as Mike mentioned, was made into a film in 1987. Prior to the war, Birkin had trained as a restorer of medieval murals. He's been hired to uncover a suspected 14th century mural in the local church of Oxgodby that had been whitewashed over. The themes of whitewash and restoration recur frequently, not least, of course, in Birkin himself being left alone to deal with the after effects of shell shock and the humbug of the post war mantra of a home fit for heroes. His personal restoration seems to travel hand in hand with that of the mural. Throughout the novel, comparisons and contrasts are juxtaposed. These are not intended as judgmental, but simply highlight differences and overlap that portray the full gamut of our world. Located as it is in a small country village, these differences and tensions that lie at the heart of any community can be portrayed in a non-confrontational fashion that allows an osmosis of human strengths and weaknesses to rebuild Birkin's sense of self slowly and silently. Despite the novels being written as a reflection many years later by Birkin of his summer working on the mural, the author makes us feel as if we're being allowed an external viewer's perspective on his growth back to humanity, a perspective of which he himself is not fully aware at the time. Birkin arrives at Oxgodby Station in pouring rain and darkness, perhaps best signifying the desperation and gloom he feels. He arrives a broken man, dehumanized through his wartime experiences and his personal loss from a broken marriage. We're not provided with the details of either, and they're referred to very infrequently in the novel. And yet we have a clear picture of Birkin's despair and emptiness from the outset. Quote, nerves shot to pieces, wife gone, dead broke. What more can you say? However, even from the outset, Birkin is presented with slivers of hope, the offer of an umbrella from the station master on that first rainy evening, the quality of the stonework in what's described as an off-the-peg church, where the mural is housed, the watertight rain gutters and downpipes. Slim pickings, perhaps, but all symbols of positivity as they lead Birkin to, quote, marvel at both nature and man and his achievements, and then reflect. By nature, we're creatures of hope, always ready to be deceived again, caught by the marvel that might be wrapped in the grubbiest brown paper parcel. We, the external onlookers, see a spark of the regrowth in this husk of a man that comes from outside himself. This is internal regrowth, nurtured not from within, but from without. And the skill of the author is in letting us feel this through our own emotional delight. We all appreciate kindness, a well-constructed building, a dry home. Birkin feels the same. Maybe there is hope for him. Maybe there is more of us in him than we might think. We feel for him and understand his pain, even without having walked in his shoes directly. And then, most abruptly, we're introduced to the vicar and are warned, quote, much can be said against the Reverend J.D. Keach, alas, yes. But he was businesslike, and in Englishmen, this is a rare virtue. Expectations already upturned on a number of levels. It turns out the Reverend Keach is also a recent arrival to Oxgodby, along with his wife Alice, and he had not been well accepted by the village. Keach is clear in his own mind that his ministry is paramount, and nothing should divert him or his parishioners from that. However, the locals seem something of a disturbance to his purpose, just as is the faulty cast iron stove that Birkin finds fascinating, and according to him, is the quote Habsburgs of the stove world. Keach, on the other hand, finds its heat output unreliable and its clanking disturbing to his sermons. Similarly, Keach is not supportive of the restoration of the mural. As he says, it will be in full view of the people. It will distract attention from worship. Single-mindedness can lead to both clarity and blindness. A fourth recent arrival is Charles Moon, an archaeologist hired by the same trust that had appointed Birkin to find a lost 14th century grave. Moon, also a demobbed officer, offers many contrasts and comparisons with Birkin. Moon is upper class. He is, as Birkin recalls, absurdly ingenious in his belief that all will be well. Moon was employed for one job, but has a different objective in mind, and he has plans once his work in Oxgodby is complete. These comparisons highlight how individuals react differently to similar situations. Both Moon and Birkin are scarred by the war and the atrocities they saw, and yet they have different outlooks. Moon has retained a sense of self from before the war. He has plans for where he is going, and he took the job in Oxgodby as a fill-in for the summer. Birkin, on the other hand, has none of these things. He's adrift, looking for a sail and direction. It's all too easy for us to put two and two together from people's backgrounds. But unless we listen to their individual stories, we can never know quite where those circumstances took them. Birkin's first real encounter with the locals is with Kathy Ellerbeck, daughter of the station master who had offered him the umbrella on the night of his arrival. She's 14 years old and in her last year of school. Birkin recognizes in her a rare breed and a kindred spirit. They understood each other perfectly from the moment she flung open the door. We're not told how he knows this, but her openness and childishness, still developing herself, may well have led Birkin to feel this bond. Kathy becomes his conduit to the village and a source of freshly cooked local meals, care of her mother. Birkin meets the vicar's wife, Alice Keach, some 9 or 10 days after he had started work, and notes that she was much younger than Keach, no more than 19 or 20, and that she was very lovely. Her neck was uncovered to her bosom, and immediately I was reminded of Botticelli, not his Venus, the Primavera. I have puzzled long and hard as to what the author was trying to tell us with this last sentence. Clearly, Alice's beauty was recognized by Birkin, and one senses an interest above that of the art critic. Reference to Botticelli's two great works of Venus portrays Alice's loveliness as being remarkable and startling, but his focus on the Primavera rather than his Venus puzzles me. The following is extracted from Britannica Online. The Primavera was painted first between 1477 and 1482. It is an allegory of spring and love, featuring mythological figures in a lush garden setting. It symbolizes the renewal of life and love and reflecting themes of fertility and beauty. The Birth of Venus was completed a few years later in 1485. It depicts Venus emerging from the sea, symbolizing the birth of beauty and love into the world. Both paintings share thematic elements of love and beauty, but they differ in their narrative focus and artistic execution. Primavera is more complex and in its composition and allegorical content, while The Birth of Venus is celebrated for its simplicity and iconic portrayal of Venus. Do you see my problem, I wonder? Birkin being astonished by Alice's pure beauty would strike me as more Venus than Primavera. So what is the author trying to tell us by asserting the opposite? that he sees Alice as a broader context of renewal to that of the more sexual Venus, that despite her beauty, there was more to this woman than meets the eye? I'm not sure, and it puzzles me still. However, Birkin was clearly struck by Alice, and he explains to her how the mural will be revealed. Quote, like a jigsaw, a face, a hand, a shoe, here a bit, there a bit, and then imperceptibly it would come together, just like him. Yet he also reflects that, quote, it simply isn't possible to return a 500-year-old wall painting to its original state. At best, I aimed at approximation, uniformity, something that looked right. He couldn't be the same person he was before the war, but maybe could achieve something that looked right. Birkin becomes more and more engrossed with his mural. He feels the painting of village life is more like a dream, but he's being drawn ever more into that dream. After a few weeks, Kathy Ellerbeck brings an invitation to Sunday dinner. This is definitely not a familiar situation for Birkin, but he goes with an open mind. No prejudices, just interest. So when Mr. Ellerbeck prefaces dinner with, quote, a grace of impressive length, Birkin simply lets his thoughts wander to why it was that, quote, that men with large moustaches have this facility of declamatory prayer. He contrasts Mr. Ellerbeck's grace with that of the visiting preacher and Mr. Jagger at tea time, that was propitiatory, uneasily terser, followed by the observation that Mr. Jagger's moustache was closely clipped. Is humour the first sign of humanity? Already the warm breeze of levity. When the Yorkshire puddings arrive, quote, Mr. Ellerbeck signalled a start by tucking a very large starched napkin into his starched collar, and this seemingly being the custom of the country, I followed suit. It was an exceedingly hot day, and we all sweated freely. What a lovely couple of sentences to remind us of the pleasures of doing in Rome what the Romans do. Go with the flow, and you may learn some things. Birkin is forced to visit the Reverend Keach at the manse to request his first instalment on payment for his work. He's surprised by the overgrown state of the grounds and the emptiness of the house itself. This is in stark contrast to the experience Birkin has of chapel folk. A small house overbrimming with furniture and with some authentic pieces of quality adornment. Once more, our expectations are upturned. Birkin's reflection on the comparison is revealing. Quote, truthfully, I was fascinated because it had never occurred to me that too big a house might have the same appalling drawbacks as too small a one. And only the reflection that I'd no home at all, except the precarious tenancy of a belfry, shielded me from black depression. The Western world we live in craves for ever more. Economic growth is now internalized as the steady state, the preferred state. We rail against having too little without wondering whether we might have too much. The tyranny of choice remains a joke rather than an existential choice. As the days pass, Birkin falls into a reflective, almost comatose tranquility. I had a feeling of immense content, and if I thought at all, it was that I'd like this to go on and on. No one going, no one coming, autumn and winter always loitering around the corner, summer's ripeness lasting forever, nothing disturbing the even tenor of my way. How often do we fall into that kind of reverie, that what we have is unmatched? We wish it to continue forever and resist all external and internal pressures for it to change. How much of our local is real and how much of the global is imagined? But Birkin's tranquility is soon shattered by Kathy Ellerbeck. She explains to Birkin that her mother could not believe that he could make a decent living uncovering murals, and that an educated man such as him should be working for the council or as a teacher. Perfectly reasonable observations, but they have a profoundly depressive effect on Birkin, as he says, our jobs are our private fantasies, our disguises, the cloak we can creep inside to hide. What an unusual way to express things, but I think a very clever take on Pope Francis's self-made prosperous orphans. How often do we describe ourselves by our profession? How often do others ask what we do? We try to define ourselves by this and other choices we consider important and we think we have control over. Perhaps these choices are little more than a disguise or shorthand of the sort of person we think we are. How even more true of the local versus global dilemma. Yet another angle on the tyranny of choice. When Alice Keach visits his workplace, she always stays out of sight at the rear of the church on a back pew, quote, sheltering behind her wide-brimmed straw hat. But the excellent acoustics of the church mean they can chat away happily without visual contact and without interrupting work on the mural. After one such exchange about the impact of tallow candles on, quote, laying down a nice grease base for other muck to stew in, there is the following section, quote, the things that keep you from screaming, well, that's extreme. Let's say it helps if you can guess how things once were. What I'm really getting at is that it's not all that easy to find your way back to the Middle Ages. They weren't us in fancy dress, mouths full of these and thous, quoths, prythies, and zounds. They had no more than a few entertaining distractions to take their minds off death and birth, sleep and work, and their prayers to the Almighty Father and his stricken Son when things got too awful. So in my job, it helps if you can smell candles, guttering in drafts, petitioning release for souls in purgatory, if you can see their smoke trailing amongst images, threading nave arcades, settling on corbels and bosses, blackening stone too high for the cleaning women to get it. I suppose it all sounds airy-fairy, but I stick to my point. If you can see or guess at the comings and goings from first daylight to dusk, crouching, nodding, stubbing breasts and head with fingers just out of the cooking pot, grubby faces staring up at the only pictures they'll see till next they see it. Well, then you put that bit extra into the job. You go at it with emotion as well as diluted hydrochloric. I quote this section in full as it highlights how important it is to view others in context, not from our perspective and probably not from theirs either, but to at least be aware, to at least, quote, smell the candles. As Birkin's father, who was not a churchgoer, would say to him before going off for a day's fishing, just off to praise by Maker on the riverbank. And even though Alice Keach is there and chatting with Birkin, the parentheses around this whole section imply that these are internal thoughts, not for discussion or debate, but a part of Birkin's newly developing local that he's rebuilding from his current global. And that current global is very mixed and different to his past. Like his parents, he's not a churchgoer, quote, becoming an unbeliever when I was 18. And yet from his belfry bedroom, he's awakened by the tolling of the church bell, then half hears the Reverend Keach's Eucharistic rites. Due to a standing invitation to Sunday supper at the station house, Birkin felt conscious bound to earn my keep by turning up at the chapel. And to his surprise, quote, once I got into the swing, if I didn't enjoy it, yes, I enjoyed it. Enter anything with an open mind, and it's surprising what results. As the mural is exposed, Birkin realizes that, quote, it was the most extraordinary detail of medieval painting that I had ever seen. Each day, I used to avoid taking in the whole by giving an exaggerated attention to the particular. Then, in the early evening, when the westering sun shone in past my baluster to briefly light the wall, I would step back, still purposefully not letting my eyes focus on it. Then I looked. It was breathtaking, like all the truly great works of art, hammering you with its whole before beguiling you with its parts. Could we find a better depiction of cultural encounter and Fratelli Tutti than hammering you with its whole before beguiling you with its parts? And as Birkin puts it, we all see things with different eyes, and it gets you nowhere hoping that even 1 in 1,000 will see things your way. Whilst admiring the mural enormously, Birkin is not blinded. He notes the painter had a very good tight line in hands, his specialty being knuckles and wrists. His hands spoke to each other and were answered, but he wasn't much good at feet. It was his quirks which really fascinated me. And when, for instance, he dropped iconographic rules to slyly lift the line of a man's lip, or turned aside to rattle off a string of grace notes on a costume's edge, things just done for the hell of it. The mural was a masterpiece, but the artist was flawed in his feet. Or were they? Were they also done for the hell of it? We may judge, but likely never know. This revelation of the picture marks a clear change in Birkin. He acts more humanly than we've seen him before. Moon inquires as to whether anything was developing between Birkin and Alice Keach, and Birkin finds it, quote, pleasantly disturbing to consider the possibility of wandering off with her, kissing. An upstairs room, its window open to the smell and sounds of an orchard, and beyond that, fields, and turning towards each other in the dusk. Perhaps for the first time, we hear Birkin talk as a normally flawed human, no longer a husk, an empty canvas, but a human being with all its beauty, darkness, and complexities, just like his mural. Our developing soldier becomes more relaxed as Alice notices, you're happy, Mr. Birkin. You're not on edge anymore, and allows people into his scaffolding to survey his work and the mural. Finally, without invitation, Alice Keach appears in his workspace and they get to discussing hell. First in the biblical sense, and then hell on earth that Birkin had seen and lived at Passchendaele. Birkin says, I told her I'd seen it and lived there, and that mercifully they usually left an exit open. Oxgodby, the mural, and Alice had been his exits. He had thought of his wife, Vinnie, the hell of living with her, the hell that she'd seen in Birkin on his return from the front, and the fact that, quote, she'd shrewdly left the door open so that if need be, she could slip back before she went again. Not all exits take us forward, but that is life, with all its hidden complexities, and Birkin sees this once again. He's back. He's his own self again, not the same Birkin as before the war, who married Vinnie, but a person with a soul, a personality, a local that can operate again within the global. Birkin and Moon continue the discussion of hell, particularly their shared World War I hell, with Birkin's face twitching away. Moon observes, quote, it's not anything like so bad as when you first turned up. I don't suppose you noticed it happening, but Oxgodby's just about ironed you out. This exchange with Moon and then the Sunday school treat the following day feel like the end of the journey for Birkin. He reflects on the passage of time and how today's beauty cannot be held on to, that we mourn what we have or will lose, and yet at certain times can balance that against the beauties that the future may hold. Birkin asks himself, am I making too much of this? Perhaps. But there are times when man and earth are one, when the pulse of living beats strong, when life is brimming with promise and the future stretches confidently ahead like that road to the hills. Well, I was young. This sounds like a person of optimism and not the battered individual that arrived in the dark and in the rain. But it also reminds us that joy in the present without that optimism for the future can lead us to very dark places. As Birkin points out, if I'd stayed there, would I always have been happy? No, I suppose not. People move away, grow older, die, and the bright belief that there will be another marvelous thing around each corner fades. And perhaps even more poignantly, quote, it is now or never. We must snatch at happiness as it flies. The Sunday school treat is portrayed as the real end of year hair down event. Men astonished their children by larking around like great lads. The courting couples sidled off and women sat around and talked. So eating, drinking, dozing, making love, the day passed until evening came and the horses were led from their pasture. This was a release for everyone, but no more than for Birkin, who was now back in the land of the sentient. One feels that the novel could have finished at this point, but the author has a final swipe at the messy aspects of cultural encounters and the otherness in others. The last 20 pages of the novel almost feel like a postscript, with Birkin back and able to operate fully as an equal member of our mixed up global world. Everything seems a little different, less dreamlike in Birkin's term, a little more real, a little less idyllic. Kathy Ellerbeck lets slip that the decision of the chapel trustees to splash out on a new organ was, quote, hearing tell that the church lot are going to have a new pipe organ. It's all right for them. They don't have to forever be raising money to pay their minister like us, she said bitterly. Their money comes from away. How often is envy a source of prejudice? By coincidence, the church, in the form of the Reverend and Mrs. Creech, are present at the same organ shop at the same time as the chapel goers searching for their new pipe organ. Pointedly, the church organ was to be new, whilst the chapel could only afford second-hand. More specifically, Birkin and Alice never exchanged more than a look, and yet he admits to his love for her. Two married people, one married to the local vicar that he was sure was a deeply religious woman. Marriage for her really did mean let no man put asunder. And yet, quote, she came each day now to visit him in the church. They discussed his wife, Alice's childhood, her marriage, her husband, and how attractive she was in general and to Birkin in particular. A true flirtation in its full sense. Nothing idyllic here. This is true, gritty, real life with all its joy, consternation, and hidden secrets. Quote, I should have lifted an arm and taken her shoulder, turned her face and kissed her. It was that kind of day. It was why she'd come. Then everything would have been different. My life, hers. We would have had to speak and say aloud what both of us knew, and then maybe turn from the window and lain down together on my makeshift bed. Afterwards, we would have gone away, maybe on the next train. My heart was racing. I was breathless. She leaned on me, waiting, and I did nothing and said nothing. Life in all its complexity that Birkin could never have fathomed or experienced at the beginning of his month in the country. Thank you.
Well, many thanks for that, Neil. It's really thoughtful and thought-provoking talk. Mike's come on to join me with the discussion. But first, there's a question from Sue Osler. Good to hear from you, Sue. Would Birkin, Sue asks, have been happy if he'd remained in the village instead of going home when he'd finished uncovering the church mural?
I think not. I mean, I think that's he ponders it, and I think it's a very interesting point in the sense that his time there had a special resonance for him. He was refinding himself. He was finding his own emotions as a human being again. But once he'd done that, I think it was time to move on and find his life. I think it would have simply have been the lost opportunities with Alice Keach, and his local is different to the village's local. He didn't fit into any particular group. He drew on every aspect of the village, and so I think he had to move on from there.
Yeah, thanks for that, and thanks for that, Sue. I just wondered now, in terms of the whitewash and taking the whitewash off, is there anything going on here about when the whitewash was put on? Because the whitewashing took place of these churches during the Reformation, quite famously of the church in Stratford-upon-Avon, which John Shakespeare, when he was told to whitewash, he supposedly said that he wouldn't do it, or at least postponed it for many years. That the whitewashing of the church was a symbol, really, of the Reformation and of two kind of conflicting elements within the context of religion.
Yeah, I think it says that Birkin believes that it was whitewashed 40 or 50 years after it was painted. So I think it was a bit early for the Reformation, but I think that it certainly does signify the fact that what we as the world consider to be in changes or can change quite rapidly for less than substantive reasons. And so I think that the fact that Birkin believes it to have been close on a masterpiece was covered over relatively quickly after it was made. And then Keach's own observation that he wanted it kept covered because it would just disrupt the parishioners. They'd be looking at the beautiful painting instead of listening to the sermon. So I think it does reflect a whole range of different aspects of what whitewash means in our world today.
Mike, do you want to come in on this?
Yeah, no, I just thought for a second there when you said that, that's also another indication of kind of the complexity of the local in the village. Of course, for the Protestant clergymen, the sermon is important. But for the Catholic parishioners, at one point or another, the image would have been important, and that was that they strengthen their faith through image as opposed to through word. And it's kind of interesting the way that seems to play out in the novel.
Mm-hmm. Well, no, I completely agree, because I think that aspect of I mean, what was the purpose of the mural? Presumably it was so that the parishioners could look and think themselves as to what does, because it was an image of uh, people on their way to hell, in a sense, or to heaven or to hell, that they would think about what does that mean to them. Whereas, as you say, in um, the vicar was very much of the view that his words were the important ones, not not the thoughts of the parishioners themselves.
Yeah, of course. I mean, I agree with you. Certainly with the English Reformation, this is a little early, but one of the reasons for those murals was that all the services were in Latin at the time, so nobody could understand what was going on. So the murals actually told the pictures, told through pictures what was going on, because the people couldn't read either. So you've got this kind of conflict between other and otherness, and what had been represented by the murals in themselves.
Yeah.
Yeah. I wonder whether there's something else.
Early PowerPoint.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just wonder whether there's something else here, which is to do also with the war and the nature of the war. Ingrid Norton, the critic, writes that Birkin has experienced emotional cruelty in an unfaithful marriage. As a soldier, he has witnessed death, destruction, and the unending mud. It's almost as if all this is, she's saying that the mud is over him, in the sense that the whitewash is over and he has got to get rid of that mud from his thoughts of the war and what had happened in the war. Do you think that's appropriate?
Absolutely. I think that his development, maybe is the right word, but the way that he develops through this time in the village is very much mirrored in what's going on in the mural. And you see, there's the interesting part where there was one extract which I included, where Birkin says that despite he talks very negatively about his wife and about his marriage, but then says that she had left a gap. She'd left it open so that she might be able to return. But then he says, as almost a throwaway, before she leaves again. And I find that a very depressing line, actually. But that, I guess, it's an aspect where he's showing that whatever happens to him, however he cleans off his whitewash and the mud and everything else, his interaction with the world is still dependent on others' choices as well as his alone. And I think that goes back to the first question as to why he would not have been happy if he'd have stayed in the village.
Yeah. You want to comment on that, Mike?
No, I was thinking of being, expecting the romantic ending. The impact that at the end when he does not respond to the pastor's, the vicar's wife. And I wonder what you made of that. That you end by saying, it's an image of the complexities of life. But I wonder why he chose that ending as opposed to the one that the more romantic of us might have found more satisfying.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a very tricky question, Mike. Actually, my own take on it is that if that would have happened, it would have changed the whole emphasis of the story, and that to me the story is about the regrowth of a human being who'd been destroyed. So he'd lost his sense of humanity, and humanity, as we know, unfortunately, is not everything pretty. It can be quite a mess. I mean, this whole local, global, and how we interact with other people. And this was about him finding himself through the global. And if he had gone off with Alice, or more surprisingly, if Alice had gone off with him, then I think it would have focused too much on the local and the personal. I mean, the fact that he felt these emotions and he made a conscious decision not to act upon them, which he may have regretted or not, showed that for me he was back as a fully formed human being with all the complexities and counter arguments that live within us all the time.
So in part, it is the fact that he has recovered the ability to feel something for another person. He's not the husk as he's described at the beginning of the novel.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But both feel it and reject it.
Yeah.
Yeah. In that, I just wonder about what other critics have talked about, which is that there's a kind of an Arthurian sense to this whole book, that is working on a kind of archetypes of things of a chivalric hero on some kind of spiritual quest. That there's that going on, and it's a fused. One says,
Right.
seeing it as a dance of once and future truths, of the truth dancing around, and you've got to be able to grasp hold of it. Do you think there's a kind of an archetypal sense to it that has made it into such a classic book?
Well, I suppose you could think of Alice as the Holy Grail in a sense, but I'm not sure that that's. I see it as much more basic and down to earth than an Arthurian quest. This is not a quest for something which is perceived as having external value or importance. This is a quest for himself, for a human being, and that quest for yourself can be helpfully informed by the rest of the world and how they act and how they interact with you. It's not just an internal process, it's one whereby you can learn from others. I think that's the message that comes across in terms of, the other may look different, but you can still learn from it.
Yeah, yeah. I think that goes to the other side of critical opinion, which which talks about the kind of novel in which a soldier comes back. And so Zola had written about that in Jacques d'Amour, and that starts off a whole kind of naturalistic movement of how the soldier then reacts as a person rather than as a spiritual kind of journey, but as a person to the circumstances that he finds when he gets back.
I think that's true, although that's why I think Moon is such a. I mean, he's quite a bit player in the novel, but I think he's also very important in that he sets that comparison with Birkin, that having gone through similar experiences, they seem to be quite different, and their reaction is quite different to the war and to the village that they come to, both afterwards.
I apologize for that. Yeah, sorry.
I'm thinking how, I was just, the soldier returns, the Hemingway hero comes back from the war and never reintegrates into society, never comes through. And it's very much the American versus the British. They say in British novels, the hero's place is enfolded once again in society. In America, the hero's place is getting out of town, as heading for the territory. And it's interesting, just it's a very local kind of comparison, but the Hemingway hero is forever lost. He never reintegrates, or never finds, reformulates himself as a functioning person, really, in society.
Well, I'm going to have to bring it to a close now, but Catherine Johnson has written in, and thank you for this, Catherine. She said, really enjoyed this talk and the book. Thank you so much. And I think we agree with that. Thank you very much for such a thought-provoking discussion on a thought-provoking book. So terrific. Thanks, Neil. Can I just now turn to some announcements that next week?
Thank you very much.
It's all right, I'll come back to you. Next week on Monday the 25th of November, Dr. Anthony O'Mahony will be talking about the sayings of the Desert Fathers. So that's Monday the 25th, same time as usual, Dr. Anthony O'Mahony, and that'll be the last in this term's series. We start again next term on the 10th of February, but I'll come to that next week. On Wednesday, the 4th of December at 4 p.m. UK time, we have a free speech event on China. That's at 11 a.m. US time, when we will be discussing living with China. What does China want? And that is a follow-on from the one we had last week, which was to do with where America goes after the elections. Can I remind people in the UK about the conference on the 16th of December, 1 to 6 p.m. at the Owlet at Blackfriars Hall. If you want to go to that conference on synodality, you have to book. Numbers are limited. They're limited actually to 70. The room won't take more than 70. So you have to book via mscott4951@gmail.com, mscott4951@gmail.com, or through the Georgetown University website. Can I thank Georgetown University for supporting this series, particularly the Vice President Global Affairs, Tom Banchoff. Thanks also to our administrators, Julia Murillo and Mary Gordon. I'd like to thank Blackfriars Hall for their support, Dominic White, the Prior, John O'Connor, the Regent, and Richard Finn, the Director of the Las Casas Institute, and their new administrator, John Angus Macaulay. Thanks to them, thanks to Maggie, my wife, who's also helped us so much in the administration. Thanks again to you, Neil, for a terrific talk today, and it was lovely to see you again. Long time since we'd talked. It's really nice to see you. I'm Mike Scott from Blackfriars Hall, Oxford. You can follow me on LinkedIn at Professor Michael Scott and at Facebook at Michael Kerr Scott. Thank you for joining us. Thank you, Mike, for coming in on the discussions. I really appreciate that.
Thank you, Neil, for that wonderful talk. Thank you.
Yeah. Goodbye. Goodbye.
It was absolutely my pleasure. Thank you.